Oh, this is non-speaking.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
All right. Oh, Senator.
Okay, I call this special workshop to order. Clerk, may we have roll call, please?
Mayor Truitt.
Here.
Vice Mayor Johnson.
Here.
Councilmember Longabaugh.
Here.
Councilmember Alton.
Here.
Councilmember Williams. Councilmember Villanueva.
Here.
Councilmember Hall.
Here.
Thank you.
If you, everybody would rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge of Allegiance.
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Chair, I'd like to acknowledge the presence of Senator Jack Harper here with us this evening. Welcome, Senator. And also a bit of an explanation as to why we're all sitting down here and not up there. And the reason for that is the first Thursday of every month is a special workshop, and what we do is we try to have subjects that the council can engage conversationally with the presenter. And so we try to make it less formal. We're not wearing ties, at least most of us, and we're here to just kind of have an exchange of ideas and to ask questions and to present our thoughts, and so we try to do that in this informal setting. The rest of our meetings are always up there from behind the dais. So having said that, welcome, Mr. Litch.
Thank you, Mayor. Good afternoon, Mayor and Council members, City Manager Oliver, Mr. Bailey. We're here today. The first item on your workshop this afternoon is to bring back to Council the workshop, almost a continuation of it, that we had on the 4th of June when our marketing consultant, Moses Anschel, presented a report to Council. What we'll do is review that report and refresh Council on what that report entailed, mirror back some of the feedback that we got from you, present some suggestions based on that feedback, and get your opinion on whether you think this is the right direction to pursue. So we'll just get started right away. Their contract calls for 4 deliverables on the 4th of June. They delivered 2 of them, the strategic analysis and the strategic foundation brief. Yet to arrive are the written marketing plan and the integrated activation plan for marketing. Their situation analysis consisted of several components. One was the perceptions of surprise among identified stakeholders. The other was the identification of what they called community equities. Other people might call them assets or strengths. Another was the identification of challenges in the community that we might have to consider and address as we consider strategic marketing. Possible platforms of a strategic approach. That is the basis for a strategic action plan. A quick review of what we think strategic marketing can accomplish for the city. For one thing, a good strategic marketing plan can establish expectations not only in the community but outside of the community. Another is to promise a certain type of experience to the target audience and deliver that experience. The key to that is having an authentic marketing plan, one that is based on the reality of the community that's attempting to market. Another is to inspire loyalty to the brand. One way to do that is, again, to be authentic, to promise people an experience that they will actually have, and with that expectation management, assuring them of a fulfilling and satisfying experience that can be repeated. Quickly moving, these are some of the strengths and equities that the consultant identified exist in surprise. It was reassuring, I think, to all of us to find that they discovered basically what many of us already know, that there is an attitude in the air in this community, that we're a friendly, optimistic community, positive thinking with a can-do attitude, empowered to realize our dreams here. We have a hometown, small-town feel. This is a comfortable place where people wave to their neighbors. It's family-oriented. Now, a lot of communities say that, and a lot of people feel that way about their community. When we drilled down a little on that, what we discovered was what people meant by that is that we're very successful in providing recreational opportunities, outdoor activities, lots of stuff for kids to do, as one person put it. Recreation, as you'll all recall, was overwhelmingly cited as the city's calling card. Nothing else was even close. That included our adult recreation programs, our adaptive rec, our youth programs, and bigger picture things like spring training, our tennis center, and our parks. As somebody said, people enjoy themselves every day in the Surprise Center around Town Lake. And the consultant pointed out that that reflects the investment in recreational resources that the council has made in the last decade. Other equities, this is a clean city and a new city. People commented on that and mentioned that. We have a volunteerism and compassionate side. People are engaged in the community, trying to help each other. And we have the White Tank Mountains, which again, as we've all talked about in the past over the last couple of years, is a real equity for Surprise. They dabbled a little bit in the tourism end of things, talking to visitors. They found many things. These are two that I know you'll recall, and that is 75% of the visitors that they interviewed who were here for spring training games said they were staying overnight, but only 8% of those people chose to stay in Surprise. 75% of them make none or one additional stop in Surprise in addition to spring training baseball. Though this wasn't part of the survey, I think it's pretty safe to say that that one additional trip was probably for food, for a meal before they went home. And in contrast, Peoria, one of the results of a survey done in that community was that they retain overnight visitors because of their access to shopping and restaurants within the same area as the sports attraction. That seemed to be the real key, and that was a research-based result. The Western Trails concept was underdeveloped and received a neutral response. That's to be expected at the stage of development of Western Trails. It's a fairly new concept. It is still in the process of being marketed and developed. But a lot of people, a significant number, had heard of Western Trails. They just weren't quite sure how to respond to it yet. We talked about who we were marketing to. The council seemed to agree that the target audiences are our residents, our businesses, prospective new residents, and prospective new businesses. At the end of their presentation, they talked about how the research had led them to suggest a number of marketing platforms. This is thematic ideas that we could build upon as we present a marketing strategy. The first one they presented was the engaged community. This picture illustrates that. People who are involved and engaged and committed to making this a better community. That's an equity that Surprise has. The recreation capital, that's clearly obvious from what we've discussed earlier. The compassionate city. We are a city that has responded to issues such as the foreclosure crisis, neighborhood cleanups. The list goes on. That's clearly an equity that Surprise has that can be built upon. The entrepreneurial city, as we all know, we're doing things as an organization to promote and foster creativity and innovation in business. Half of our business licenses go to home-based businesses. We do have an entrepreneurial vibe here in Surprise. And we're a city that feels like a town. I think we all know that too. Things like the Memorial Day Parade, the Surprise Party, our community activities rated very high as part of the quality of life experience. People mentioned that. And we are for families at every stage. Not just young families, not just retired people, but to bookend the concept of families. But we are for families at every stage of life. Something else they said was, well, we could consider combining a couple of platforms. The ones that they presented to council as an example were family and recreation, or entrepreneurial and compassion. So that kind of sums up what we were presented in June. I'd like now to move on to what we heard council say in the course of that presentation and discussing that presentation. The feedback that we got from council was that an educational component was very important as we move forward with strategic marketing. That families and quality of life were something that needed to be at the fore in the image of Surprise moving forward. That a way needed to be found to capture that sense of energy and optimism in the community. That recreation clearly had a large role to play in the way Surprise is marketed. That business and entrepreneurial spirit should have a presence. That volunteerism, compassion, and partnering, something that is really coming on in Surprise and which was picked up by the research, also needs to be present. That sense of connectivity, that Surprise is a place where all the pieces in your life can be connected. We are connected to our families, our jobs, our communities, our hobbies, our churches, and Surprise is the place where all of that can come together. What we've done is take that council input and create that orange bar is what we'll call a platform or a pillar. We propose to you that based on your feedback and what the consultant thought, that we go forward with a theme of connectivity and opportunity. That's at the very top of this slide. That's not a slogan. That is just a theme. A marketing firm will, in the course of their research and development, help us along the lines of a slogan, if one's even appropriate. But that's the theme. One of the pillars supporting that theme is the quality of life idea. Again, reflecting all of the equities that was found in the research in Surprise. We're clean, safe, friendly, small town feel, a city for all ages, for families at all ages. We have great weather, great public safety, and a wonderful community activities. year-round community activities. There's the education pillar. We have the Lifelong Learning Center through Rio Salado, a unique community asset. The community is now here on site and open and is very active in lining up partners. As we know, they have partnered with Ottawa, the Incarnate Word. They have other partners, a real focus on post-secondary education in Surprise. That seems to be where our educational reputation is leading us. And, of course, we have excellent public and charter schools. I just realized that I differentiated between them. Charter schools are public schools, of course, but I think you know what I mean. We have very good charter schools and, of course, a very good unified school district in Surprise, unified school districts in Surprise. The recreation pillar includes things like our parks, our great tennis program, which again is a real entity that's coming on in Surprise, our rec programs for all ages, spring training is clearly popular, the white tanks, and the possibility of the development of Western trails. Finally, the business entrepreneurial pillar. There are trace elements of that in the community now. This is maybe the one that's the least developed of the four that we would have to talk about how to really build. It does dovetail with the concept of opportunity. Again, it goes back to those home-based businesses. People are here starting businesses because they sense that opportunity in Surprise. We can talk about things like the Techcelerator concept at the previous City Hall site. And, of course, the community, council, government commitment to attracting business, to supporting business, and to creating jobs in the community. When you put all those together, it looks something like that. At the very bottom, we have that volunteerism and compassion equity. In discussing this with some of you individually and in groups around the city, we determined that, gosh, volunteerism and compassion really applies to all of those pillars, to all of those equities. You can pick any of those four, and you can find a volunteerism component to it, and you can find a compassion component to it. That pretty much concludes the presentation. I want to talk a little bit about timelines before I ask for your comments and additional feedback and guidance that we might want to give the consultant as we move forward. As you might know, the Tourism Committee is planning to present a strategic plan to Council this fall in November. We hope to have a written marketing plan by the end of September and early October because we feel that that can be a foundational document that will help the Tourism Committee develop their strategic plan as a facet of, again, a foundational marketing plan. That concludes my presentation, and I'll be happy to, again, seek additional guidance or comments from Council on this.
Could you go back to the previous slide?
Sure.
Just a point of clarification. The F/QOL stands for
Family and Quality of Life.
Okay.
Thanks, Mary. Yep, you sussed that one out. That was that one we couldn't quite squeeze in there.
I didn't think so.
Question. Ken, will the consultant come up with suggestions or activities to bring about quality of life?
Yes.
Or is it up to us to come up with those?
Well, I'm not sure about the activities part, but what the contract calls for them to do is present a written marketing plan, which we just talked about, the timeline for that. That would be the end of Phase 1 of their contract. Phase 2 of the contract calls for them to present an integrated activation plan by which we would figure out the timing and the vehicles in which we would begin to actually initiate this marketing strategic plan. Part of that could very well involve the suggestion or the concepts of additional activities or community events to support these pillars.
Right. Thank you.
Just as a reminder, in this type of meeting, we don't need permission to speak. Just speak out and ask your questions and make your comments.
Kim, I wasn't able to make the June 4th meeting, but do we have a count of how many residents, how many business owners, how many external visitors were queried?
Yes, we do. To talk a little bit about how the approach was, this is a qualitative research approach where people were scientifically identified so that the interview process could be a little more contemporaneous and freewheeling, and there's a lot of follow-up. It wasn't a simple survey. The total number of people interviewed is 138. I don't have that broken down for you in terms of how many of those were business people as opposed to residents. The approach, though, for example, in talking to business people, was to talk with the chamber, talk among all the groups that might have an interest or an idea, present a list of businesses, contact those businesses by phone, go through a screening process with them so that the focus group was well balanced in terms of tenure and surprise, type of business, number of employees, et cetera, and the same philosophy and approach applied to residents and outside or external stakeholders.
Okay. One of the challenges they described was Dysart School District.
One of the things that was mentioned by some of the external stakeholders was that issue, yes.
And I see their scores improving.
Absolutely.
So maybe it's a perception?
I think, if I may refer to the mayor's comments in the paper when that was written about, there is no question, I think, in all of our minds that that's an outdated perception.
Yeah. Because there's a lot of metrics on how well, there's test scores, there's graduation rates, there's how many kids matriculate to college.
You bet.
There's a lot of ways to measure. And so I know Dysart right now is doing a very good job of getting the word out as to some of the things they're doing and some of the improvements they made, and I think that's great. And I think the realtors hopefully are getting the message that when you live in Surprise, your kids are going to get well educated.
Absolutely. I agree.
Anyway, because it's an important component. I'm looking at the communiversity, and it is just I am so excited about it. But I'm just trying to figure out how in the heck do we really get the word out about communiversity and all the things it's going to offer, and because it's going to be a real pillar of this community. I mean, like the mayor and I were talking about, we went from 0 to 180 miles an hour in higher education.
Absolutely, we did.
And so, I mean, there's all kinds of programs. I mean, John's thinking about going back to get your doctor, aren't you? Anyway, but there's a lot of, I'm having there's, at the chamber gathering Friday night, I was really promoting communiversity, and a lot of people there that belong to the chamber didn't know anything about it, and they didn't know where it was. So I think we need to really think about how we're going to, and how Moses Anshel can help us get that lift off, so people are very aware of what an asset that is to us.
I really appreciate that comment. I had a chance through Councilman Williams to meet with Dr. Hoffman from Ottawa University earlier this week. It's great to see people like that coming into the community and approaching the city. What's interesting about the community concept from a marketing perspective is there's a lot of players involved because they're so focused on partnership, which is what makes them unique and innovative.
Right.
So we have to talk to a lot of different people and figure out roles and figure out marketing strategic approaches for the community. I would assume and I would encourage the city to have a role in that. My assumption is that working with Dr. Aukus at Rio, that we'll be able to lend whatever support we can to their marketing program. Absolutely.
I'm hearing that they're having a little bit of trouble picking up the audio, so if everybody can speak into their mics, that would be good.
Also, on page 42 of the situation analysis, they're talking about the a venue for large programming. Mm-hmm. We've got a venue for large programming. We have a stadium, we have a baseball stadium, we have a tennis facility.
Yeah, it's great to have that tennis facility there, and as we know, going forward into the general obligation bond program, the residents of the city will have an opportunity to vote on whether to even expand that into a multi-use center.
Right, but that's already here.
That's an identified equity. I see what you're saying. Mm-hmm.
Any further comments?
Yeah, first I apologize to everybody for coming in late. Sorry. I like what you're saying, Skip. I think, and you put it perfectly, we've gone from 0 to 100 and gazillion miles an hour in higher ed, and there's so many players involved, and there's so many relationships that are going on right now that have just infused themselves within this community. And I could see that second piece right there as being the forefront of our community, and it's going to take everything to a higher level. And when you talk about economic development, this is going to be a foundation for it. This is going to be a foundation. And there's going to be a lot of other bigger, better things that are going to come along as a result of this. So I think that I like the way, I had an opportunity to sit down with you, Ken, and I like the way you put this together. And I think that volunteerism and compassion, you're 100% right. It's across the board. But I think those middle two areas are real strengths. So I don't know what our end goal is here, but if we're trying to market and looking at economic development, those middle two areas, education, recreation, those are our real strengths in our community.
Mm-hmm. I agree. Yeah.
And I know economic development's doing a mail out to all the home-based businesses, which we got a ton of home-based businesses. And so they're looking at them as maybe somebody out there as a home-based business that has a product that they want to take to the next level. Maybe that'll work in the AZ to accelerate it, you know. But I think those are the kinds of things we need to just reach out and let people know what we got. I think the accelerator is another thing that's kind of confusing to a lot of people. I don't think our residents have a real good idea what that is and what we expect it to be. That's my opinion. So that's another marketing challenge we have. You know, Ken?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's something I'll be working on starting this coming week.
Good. And then Janine's back next week, right? So that'll help.
She's the manager of the facility.
Yes. Now, one of the things that strikes me is you say that volunteerism and compassion goes across, it runs the gamut. And I think that includes, action by the council. So when we're talking about businesses, I think we're all recognizing that this may be a time to make some accommodations and to give a little relief and to hopefully help out some of our local businesses here so that they can weather this economic storm. And so I see that running. It is a common thread throughout all that we do, and it is never far from the forefront of our mind when we're working with groups or with programs, is we want to make sure that we are reaching out to our neighbors and showing that spirit of volunteerism and compassion.
One thing you said earlier this week, Mayor, when Dr. Hoffman was introducing himself to a lot of us in the city, you said we want to make sure we embrace Dr. Hoffman. I thought that was an interesting choice of words, and it demonstrates, again, that idea that I think we can apply to all of these, as you said, of compassion and welcoming and inclusion. That's part of what makes Surprise a special place.
Yes.
Any other comments? Is everybody comfortable with the direction we're going?
So far.
Looks good.
Okay, our next step then will be to take what we presented to you today, start working with the consultant to create a written strategic plan and return that to council into September or October. I'll work with Mr. Oliver on that.
And Ken, remind them one thing. This is just my opinion. They made a comment about, does tourism really deserve a plan to market? Well, I think 8% of the people staying in Surprise answers that question. I mean, we need, okay?
I see what you're saying. Yeah. I'll make sure I relay that message,
I mean, that's ridiculous. So, anyway.
Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Move right to item number 2.
Thank you. Presentation regarding development impact fees with emphasis on the roads of regional significance impact fee.
Thanks.
Mayor Truitt, members of City Council, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Here to present to you some ideas for dealing with development impact fees. What I'd like to cover today in the presentation is to kind of really go way back, primarily for the audience and for the people at home, to gain an understanding of what an impact fee is, and to spend a fair amount of time providing some detailed explanation of the roads of regional significance fee, because that is the fee that's been the most controversial and perhaps misunderstood. I'm also going to describe how impact fees are a growth management tool and also show you a comparison by jurisdiction of the impact fees throughout the valley. And then really the heart of the discussion, I believe, would be identifying some alternative funding methods to the roads of regional significance. These would include the Community Facilities District, road construction in lieu of fees, private cost sharing agreements, sales tax anticipation, and higher residential fees while lowering commercial fees. I'll go through each one of those in some detail. And at the end of the description of those alternatives, we'll encourage council to have some discussion and provide me with some feedback on which direction you want to go to. And perhaps you may say that they're all reasonable alternatives and we should work with the developers on those options. Let me step back and remind everybody that impact fees really create competing values. They truly do. There are quality of life issues involved here, whether it's proximity to retail shopping opportunities in a particular neighborhood. There are congestion issues. There are commuting issues. Those are all quality of life things that are very valuable to everybody in our community. The number one issue we hear from residents regularly is they say, if we're going to have additional growth, make sure that our transportation network is in place to accommodate the traffic. Economic development is also a competing value in this case, whether it's the creation of sales tax revenue or the creation of jobs. Growth management as well. Can we use impact fees to steer and manage growth? And perhaps the fundamental issue in competing value is financial equity. Who pays for this public infrastructure? Public infrastructure is extremely expensive. We all know that. I'll show you some specifics in a little while. So who pays for it? Is it spread across the entire city? Should it be in a particular district? Should it fall on developers themselves? So what that yields, frankly, is a difficult policy decision for City Council and for the mayor, because these are competing values you have to juggle and determine which one is more important than the other, or you try to strike a balance between all of them. The current policy when it comes to impact fees is that it is a growth management tool, and they should be used to support the cost of growth, should minimize the financial impact of growth on existing residents, and that's important, existing residents. It needs to fund required infrastructure and needs to promote economic development. How? By expanding infrastructure to commercial properties. A piece of property obviously can't turn into a vibrant commercial development unless it has sewer and water and roads and so on. How do impact fees work? It's a funding mechanism for reimbursement or funding of eligible public infrastructure, and I'll show you that list in a minute. The city can also fund infrastructure projects through the collection of those fees, or conversely, we can reimburse a developer when they install those infrastructure components for us. What impact fees fund? It's really simple to think about. When we have a new development, when it's a patch of desert, there's nothing going on, there's no development, but when it turns into a subdivision, when it turns into a commercial development, shopping center, and so forth, what do they need? They demand additional capital improvements. They need water and sewer. They need additional police protection, whether they're a police station or a police car. They need fire protection. When it comes to residential developments, they also create a demand for a library and parks, government, and of course roads, and in this case, roads of regional significance. Impact fees do not fund operations, programs, staffing of that nature, just capital. But each new development is going to generate the demand for additional capital. Now let me take some time and dwell on roads of regional significance, because again, that's the topic du jour, if you will. That fee is used to fund major roadways. And the map that you see up on the screen right now is an outline of the entire city at build-out. Again, at build-out, not the current village limits, but at build-out. And the pink lines that are shown on the map, those are the roads of regional significance. They're major roadways that connect and provide facilitation of traffic between larger areas. They're not local streets. They're not even arterial streets. They're large roadways that facilitate the movement of traffic regionally. There's only 8 roads in the entire city of Surprise.
2 lanes both ways.
There are actually even more lanes in some cases, 3 lanes in both directions, but it includes 327 lane miles, bridges, and interchanges. If you think that through, this number shouldn't shock you. It's over $600 million citywide. Again, $600 million, so it's not cheap, and we have to find a way to fund it. That cost, the entire $600 million, is spread out over the entire city by SPA, and SPA, for the folks in the background, is called a special planning area. It's simply a convenient way of describing a geographic portion of the city. That's all it is, a special planning area. The specific fees paid by development is based on traffic generation, and that's how we get the equity. New development generates more traffic, okay? And new development should pay for its fair share of the roadway improvements. They generate the demand for traffic, the demand for more roadways. They should pay for their pro rata share of the roadway improvements, okay? People have asked frequently, why in the world do certain areas of town have to pay a higher impact fee compared to others? The reason for that is it's broken out by special planning area. The area that I just highlighted in yellow is the special planning areas 2, 4, and 6. In those areas, a home, this is just an example, would pay a regional impact fee of $5,715. And that covers all these roads, the pink roads here, okay? And just those roads, not any other roads. Areas in SPA 3 and 5 would pay for those pink roads in that area And Special Planning Area 1, as you look closely on the map, does not have any roads of regional significance because the road infrastructure is already in place. Again, it's already in place. Therefore, there's no additional demand for roads of regional significance. Therefore, there is no cost or fee in that area. And that's why we differentiate between the three. Again, it brings equity to it. What that should say to you is, boy, isn't that really steering development into one special planning area or one geographic region of town compared to the other? And the simple answer is yes, and that is by design. It really helps steer development to areas with existing infrastructure and utilities and discourages leapfrog development because they'll end up paying higher impact fees. Think of it this way. Is it easier and more cost-effective to develop a subdivision that is already surrounded by utilities and already has roadway next to it that we can simply connect to, or is it more expensive when a development happens out in the desert that everything has to be extended to? Obviously, the answer is something closer in. So if you're closer in, if you have more access to utilities, you're going to be paying lower impact fees because the utilities are already there. So it is a growth management tool. When the fees were developed initially, staff at that time certainly did look at the City of Surprise fee schedule and compared it to other jurisdictions. I broke it down for you by special planning area because, as I've just described, they are different. In most of the planning areas, Surprise is a higher than average impact fee, whether it's the total impact fee complement or if it's just for roads. But if you look at Special Planning Area 1, we're actually quite low compared to other jurisdictions. This is very fluid. As you might imagine, many jurisdictions throughout the valley are grappling with this issue as well. Since that time, some cities are offering subsidies, some are phasing in these fees over time, and others are offering exceptions. So at any given time, this chart could change. But back when these fees were originally put together, we were, higher than some and lower than others, but not way out front of anybody else. I think the best way for me to describe in a very practical sense, instead of just showing narrative and tables, is to show a development example, okay? So let's just say that a developer walked in and wanted to develop this piece of property right here that I've outlined in red. That's adjacent to Deer Valley Road. Okay, so let's walk through that model. For descriptive purposes only, let's call it new development acres for a name. Let's assume it's 512 acres, and it's going to have 1,500 homes and 1.2 million square feet of commercial. And that's actually typical if you think about our average densities, our average development patterns, and how much square footage you can place on that type of development. So it's about as live as it could be or about as real as it could be. That entire development, and it seems like a big number, but it is accurate, would generate 65,000 trips per day. That simply means cars coming in and cars going out. One trip is one way, another trip is out. Okay? The current fee schedule would generate $8 million worth of residential fees, everything aggregate, and $14 million worth of commercial fees. And again, that's based on the demand and the trips generated by the commercial compared to the residential. At the end of the day, that is $22.5 million worth of fee. That's a lot of money. That's a lot of money just for this one development. Okay? Now, in this case, the developer would very likely build that portion of Deer Valley Road, which is a road of regional significance, next to their development. It's about a mile of roadway, okay, in this example for illustrative purposes. They would get a credit against that total $22 million fee for the cost of that roadway. Pretty accurate number is $7.5 million. So the fee balance that they would have to carry with impact fees would be $15 million. So taking that to the next, that would mean that the residential share would still be $5.5 million. If you break it down by the 1,500 homes, that would be $3,600 per home cost. Okay? Let me stop here and stress that these aren't extra fees that are paid on and passed on to individual homeowners after they're in their home, not after they're in their home. Typically, developers pay these up front, and they pass that cost into the homeowner via the sales price of the home. So they know what they're getting into when they buy their home. It's all part of it. Okay? The commercial share, the remainder, would be $9.9 million. If you take that down to a square footage amount, that's $8.25 per square foot. So that gives us a 100,000 square foot retail building, which is about the size of a large grocery store. They would pay $825,000 of roads of regional significance fee. Okay, so hopefully that model helped you track through how that goes from start to finish. Now let me get to the heart of the matter. There are certainly many alternatives to fund roads of regional significance, but here's the thing I think we can all agree to, that any alternative that we choose, that compared to what we pay now, must yield a viable transportation network. Again, we hear it from residents all the time. The last thing we want this community to have is congestion and gridlock and traffic safety issues. Okay, so we have to have a viable network at the end of the day. And we also have to be whole. And what I mean by that is we can move money around, okay? We can provide credits, we can do financing plans and so forth and so on, but at the end of the day, we have to be able to find $600 million worth of roadway improvements. Either they build the road or the equivalent cash, one or the other. But at the end of the day, we have to be whole, and that's what I mean by that. Okay? The other issue, and this is where it gets tricky for the mayor and council, equity is a big issue. Okay? So should that entire transportation cost burden, the whole $600 million, should that fall on the entire city, each individual, each property owner, or within that particular district or SPA that is primarily generating the traffic? Okay? The other thing to keep in mind is to not fund the road improvements will lead to a lower quality of life and much less economic development, meaning if we approve commercial development, residential development, but don't improve our roadway system, we're going to have traffic, we're going to have congestion, we're going to have accidents. And because of that, people, when they come to decide whether they want to build a shopping center, upscale retail, or corporate office, are going to see that, and they're not going to build in the city because they're going to say, look, these people don't have the roadway network that we need to either get people to our store or get our product out to market. Okay? And the other
note one thing, Jeff, just while we're here. One of the things that you can do, and it's really a question of how you want the community to look, is the roads, for example, in this particular area have been designed primarily as parkways. In other words, they have a nice median in it, sidewalks, curb on both sides. Obviously, we can go through and redesign this and make it so you just have a 5-lane road section with a center turn lane, no medians at all, and that would make the roadway infrastructure less expensive. And you would save some amount of percentage of money, 10%, whatever, 12%, some amount of money, and that could be used as a method to reduce the cost. The question that you've got to ask, though, if you want to do that, is what is your desire for the aesthetic quality of the community? Mm-hmm. But that's another way you can control the cost.
The last thing to consider as we look at the alternatives is that there's an existing agreement in place between City Council, whether it's this council or past councils, and a property owner or developer. We really have to honor those agreements. If someone has made an improvement to a road of regional significance, and we have committed to use some of the impact fees that we're collecting to repay that developer, we're abided by that. We can't change it. Obviously, there's significant legal issues if we change the rules at that point. So here are the alternatives, and I'll walk you through each one: CFD, sales tax, private cost sharing, road construction, and requiring higher residential fees. The first alternative is to create a community facilities district, commonly referred to as a CFD. It is the creation of a true separate taxing district used to fund infrastructure in a particular geographic area. What it really creates at the end of the day, the output is a separate line item, a true line item, on a property tax bill for individual homeowners, specifically for infrastructure. In this case, it would be for a road of regional significance. If the mayor and council are going to consider offering this as an alternative to developers, I would recommend the following conditions, though. That the developer still has to construct a road if it's adjacent to the site. We'd still provide a credit, but if there's a road next to it, we still need to ask them to build it. Strongly recommend that residential areas, residential subdivisions, are the only appropriate place to do a CFD. Sales tax is better for commercial, and I'll describe that a little bit later on. The balance of the fee, after we give them the credit, is paid in the future as residential properties are developed. And the other thing that's critical is the CFD goes away after the total fee is paid. In other words, we can't keep collecting that fee and collecting it and collecting it. Once they're whole, the fee goes away. And this is important, and this is a recommended condition for many of these alternatives, and that is the developer would still be required to post surety to guarantee full payment. And that simply provides us with a financial backstop in case something goes sideways, in case there's not enough yield. That's important to make sure that we're whole.
What's the financing load on this? on a CFD?
There really isn't any on that. It's just the capital cost, the design cost spread out over the number of property owners and divided up.
Well, we have a CFD in Marley Park, right?
You have a CFD in Marley Park, but there are restrictions on the CFD as it relates to administrative costs. But, you know, one of the things that you've got to look at is what would happen with the advent of the CFD is you would be essentially charging additional property tax or what would appear to be property tax above and beyond what all the other citizens in Surprise are paying. So while that would reduce the initial cost of the house by, say, the $5,000 and some dollars, okay, it would increase the burden as it relates to the appearance of property tax for some, whatever the period of time is that it took to retire the CFD bonds.
Yeah.
Right now, without any backstop on a CFD, there's no market financially for CFDs. It just doesn't exist because of that. The CFD in Marley Park is $3. The city's general tax rate is 60 cents.
Jeff, also,
Sure.
isn't a CFD put in place at the time of development rather than when the residential area is built out?
Oh, it's definitely at the time of development.
Right,
Absolutely.
right.
Yeah. I guess the positives for the CFD are the roads are funded, and we're whole. The developer, this is very much positive for the developer, has less upfront money and much lower potential carry costs, obviously, a guaranteed revenue stream. And at the end of the day, it would also have lower home sales price. But as Mr. Oliver mentioned, there's a lot of negatives on this. Much slower collection of the fee. It's based on the build out of the entire subdivision. The fee is paid directly by the homeowner. So it shows up on their tax bill. Market-driven repayment relies on the market. Got to sell homes before you get it back. You have to have occupancy. Here's the other one that's tricky. If the plan changes, in other words, if someone comes in, amends their PUD, and the number of housing units change, then the cost share changes, obviously. And as Mr. Oliver mentioned, this is critical. Different tax levies for different residential uses. I'll give you a specific example. It may seem extreme, but it's true. Let's just say that I'm in the CFD area, okay, and I have my tax bill, and I'm paying the extra rate, okay? The guy across the street from me, my neighbor across the street, is outside the CFD. They're not paying that fee. Are we both using the roadway? Probably. Probably. So there's an issue there. I have experience back in Illinois with creating, we call them back there special service areas. And certain times they can be approved by elected bodies. They get going, they go forward, and then residents go, why am I paying this extra bill? And the next thing you know, the financial burden is strapped back onto the city. So you got to be real careful. There's also a perception of payment of roads of general use. And what I mean by that is someone would say, everybody uses this roadway, why am I paying for it? So there are some negatives to create a CFD. Here's one that does have a little bit of legs to it, but also something that has negatives. Let me walk you through this. This is for commercial development, where commercial development pays the road of regional significance fee up front, okay? But then the developer is allowed to use future sales tax revenue to pay themselves back for the fee that they paid, okay? Again, conditions that we would recommend if you go along with this is that, again, the developer constructs the road if it's against the site, they get the credit. But here's the other thing. The future sales tax revenue really should be shared. 100% in a given year really shouldn't be committed just to retire the fee. Okay, it really should be shared. So in other words, if the development, I'm just using round numbers, is generating $1 million of annual sales tax each year, annualized basis, then they shouldn't use that 100% to pay back. 50 of it should go to retirement. 50% should still go to the city for general use. Okay, and again, just like the last one, they need to post surety to guarantee full payment.
Question. Not all businesses generate sales tax. And so when we're looking at these alternatives, we have to look at the source that's going to be paying it back. A true retail center would probably generate some sales tax. However, I believe a grocery store does not generate sales tax.
It generates some, but not on every product.
Right.
Food is not taxable for sales tax purposes, so a large portion of what they sell is not taxable.
Right.
And a law office wouldn't have it.
Right. Any services would not have it.
Correct. I mean, the grocery store example is a good one. They would still be eligible. They would still be able to pay it back, but it would take a long, long time.
Right.
Yeah.
So Jeff, is there a fee to the city when you use a CFD?
Is there a fee to the city?
Yeah.
No, there's not.
To the developer at all?
No, there's not. That's why it's very positive for the developer.
We charge, I think there's a $25,000 or so administrative fee, I believe, in there to set it up.
There's a minimum $10,000 fee, but it's also dependent upon what's required of staff in terms of administering the CFD. So it could be greater than that, but it's a minimum of $10,000 annually.
And there's also, I think, an administrative service charge of about 30 cents, I believe. There's a percentage that said it's not that great, but
Recoverable through the district.
but it's an administrative charge for administering the CFD, because this board also sits as the CFD board in a slightly different capacity.
Yeah.
And the fee is recoverable through the district
Yeah.
itself.
Earlier, you mentioned that when you use a CFD, there might be a higher cost where you don't use one when buying a house. How much difference would it be?
It frankly depends on a number of factors. Depends which geographic area they're in, the SPA area. 2, it depends on how many roads of regional significance are affected by that area. And 3, it depends, well, there's even more factors. 3, it depends on whether or not they build a portion of the road, which will get them a credit. And 4 is it depends on the density of the development. Obviously, the more units, the lower the incremental cost. A lot of variables.
Can I ask a question regarding like Marley Park? Okay, and Marley Park is not completely built out, right? But the CFD is in place. So those people who are that occupy those residences now are feeling a greater proportion of the tax increase as a result of the payback.
That's exactly right.
Okay, and that as that gets filled out, as it gets completed, Marley Park, then it'll be reduced.
Not necessarily. They're assuming build-out, so the pro rata share is equalized among the housing units.
Right now.
If they but if they change the unit count, the unit mix, then it would change.
So they're not collecting all their repayment monies
Not
to
yet.
satisfy the debt in the prescribed manner that they were going to.
And they also have not installed all the improvements they plan to install.
Right.
Because they don't have the capacity. You're limited to certain amounts of value that you can do under their structure and how they structured their CFD.
Okay.
Also, Jeff, on the CFD, if the developer pulls out, the city isn't responsible at all for any of the, for
No.
the CFD? No.
No, it's not.
So the residents are
That's correct.
totally.
But
I will say this, the less the city is responsible and the less assurance, and that's the reason for the guarantees, the less the assurances are as it relates to an investor ultimately being repaid, the harder it is to sell the bonds and the higher the interest rate. It's kind of like, you know, the difference between somebody going in and applying for a mortgage and perhaps Bill Gates going in and applying for a mortgage. One may have a greater level of success and a more favorable interest rate.
it's a good analogy. Yeah. Going back to the sales tax, so the positives for using future sales tax to pay for it, the roads are funded, we're whole. That's a good thing. Very positive for the developer. They have less upfront and potential carry cost and lower pre-development commercial development costs. The negatives are, again, much slower collection of the fees. The grocery store is a good example. Market-driven repayment, okay? And here's the negative. This is something we really have to consider. Sales tax right now currently goes into the general fund, okay? What you're doing by allowing sales tax to be credited against the impact fee is diverting that away from the general fund, which means that any other projects, programs that are usually funded with the general fund are now competing, okay? So you're basically taking that fund out of the general fund and earmarking it just to transportation. So that's something you would have to think about and figure out how to fill that hole that's being created by the diversion.
And I would also add that historically, the city has provided certain incentives, Persada being one, 50% of the sales tax went back to infrastructure, and that's what's been used as an incentive that the city got to give incentives to get certain businesses, certain types of developments to be in certain places. If it's an incentive that's automatically available everywhere in the city, then there is no incentive anymore to target certain things in certain areas and to get them within the city.
The next alternative is really just to rely simply on private cost-sharing arrangements to build the roadway itself. Simply put, the developers construct the roadway together. and all those costs are credited against the roads of regional significance. If they're building enough roadway, then they get the credit. They could go down to zero and have to pay no impact fee and actually get a road. The negative, significant, obvious upfront costs for the developer. It relies on coordination between two property owners, which can get tricky. And there's less flexibility to use the funds elsewhere. It's just going to this roadway and only that roadway. We can't collect it and then build roadways elsewhere. Positive is the roads are actually built. Okay? It's enhanced traffic flow immediately. In this example here, the people who live in that subdivision, the people that are frequenting that shopping center are able to use that roadway. So that's a positive. And obviously there's reduced construction costs because it's building one time upfront as a collective instead of in phases. Okay, so that one's pretty straightforward. This is the one I like the best. I'll tell you that right away. Alternative number 4 is something that's not done in this area very often, and that is simply that residential subsidizes commercial for their portion of the impact fee. And I'll walk you through this one relatively slow. If you recall, under our existing fee structure, the total fee for the hypothetical development was $15 million. Okay? Based on traffic generation, again, traffic generation, 36% of those trips are on residential. They'd have to pay $5.5 million or $3,600 per home. Commercial generates 64%. Let me stop and just say, remember, it's not based on land area. That's why, the numbers may look weird on the map, but it's not based on land area. It's based on trips generated. But 64% of the traffic is generated by commercial, and they would have to pay $8.8 million of fees. Okay? If the property owner agrees that residential impact fees will subsidize commercial, what we would do then is simply transfer the burden of the impact fee, instead of it being shared and split on demand, all to the residential side, 100% to the residential side. So they'd be responsible for $15.4 million, and commercial would pay $0. Has a significant impact on the per home cost. It would go up to $10,000 per home. But again, let me remind you, this fee is paid at building permit. It's up front. People going into buying the home would know it's coming. Okay, it's not like there would be an extra tax, extra burden put on, and commercial would pay $0. There's a lot of positives and a few negatives with this one. Positives, again, we're whole. The roads are funded. Very positive for commercial development, obviously. Okay, and it frankly incentivizes commercial development. Why does it do that? One, it creates rooftops. It creates customers, and their fees are paid for in advance. They don't have to worry about paying that fee in advance. So very positive. On the negative side, it may scare away residential developers. Residential developers would say, look, I don't want to have to jack the price of my homes up by $5,000. But again, at least they would know it going in. It would translate to higher home sales prices. And let me tell you that I could have put that in the positive or the negative, and let me explain. If the goal is to provide affordable, attainable housing, then it would be a negative. On the flip side, if the goal is to drive up sales prices, and by doing that, driving up land values, then it could be a positive. It could be a positive. So we're selling homes for $315,000 instead of $300,000. The thing I like about this the best, and I think this goes along with the direction that the mayor and council are heading, is that it sends a growth management message that residential, when we approve residential, it must lead to an incentivized economic development. Yes, we're putting a bigger burden on residential, but we're doing that in an effort to create more economic development.
Or you can do something in between, too. Those are the two extremes. I mean, you can blend this a lot of different ways. It gets back to what Jeff said originally. You need so much money to construct those roads. And you could do a tax of general application across the city to pay for those roads, such as sales tax citywide. You could do it as property tax citywide with voter approval. You could do it as impact fees citywide. So there are a whole laundry list of ways you can approach this.
Jeff, is this based on size of residential per acre? What is 3.5, or what are you using as far as your figures?
Yeah, that was just going back to that model I showed you before in the beginning. And those numbers, again, as Mr. Oliver just mentioned, we can blend them either way. But again, the concept is that residential pays more in exchange for commercial paying less.
Well, if you have a place that you have the acre lots,
okay,
Would the price be higher to make up the difference? I mean,
Yes, it would.
yeah, okay.
Yes, it would. Yeah.
But remember, with an acre lot versus, let's say, a quarter acre lot, you get 4 houses on the quarter acre, so you got more traffic, okay, but you still got to pay for the same amount of roads. Perhaps they don't need to be as big. So, you know, that's a consideration.
Can I just slow, I'm sorry, did I cut anybody off?
Just real quick, I don't know, the slide before this one,
Yeah.
okay, well, in my presentation, I got 23,500,000.
I had to take out the credit for building a roadway. That's what I did. I changed the slide just to show more accurate numbers.
Because the page before is 22.5.
Right. I just adjusted the numbers to account for the credit.
Oh, okay, all
Yep.
right.
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, Jeff. It's just a point of clarification to slow down in case folks don't understand. Can you define roads of regional significance?
Sure.
And then as a clarification piece, can you explain why SPA 1 and the construction of roadways and infrastructure in SPA 1 is so different?
Sure. If it's okay, I'm just going to back up a little bit. Then I just have one more closing slide, and then I'm good to go. Just real quickly again, this is a map that shows the entire build-out limits of the city of Surprise. The roads of regional significance are only those roads that we've highlighted in pink, but in addition to that, it includes bridges and interchanges. The cost to build those roadways is $600 million, and it's spread out. Those roadways are roadways that carry traffic from one region to another. They're roads of general use, and they're not your small collector roads and so on. The reason that certain special planning areas pay higher than others is depends on what roadways are located in the geographic region. So in SPAs 2, 4, and 6, that's the cost, and they're only paying for these roadways within that geographic boundary. In 3 and 4, they're just paying for those roadways. And again, as you look at SPA 1, there are no roads of regional significance in that SPA. Therefore, there is no roads of regional significance impact fee for residential, commercial, any type of development. The roadway network is in place.
I would also note that on this, please remember that the study that was done, and I mean, it can be updated, that's easy. It takes probably 6 to 12 months to update it. But the study that was done also calculated the fact that not all of this road capacity, this new road capacity, was going to be used by these particular dwellings, and it does have some general fund dollars in it. It's about 30%, I believe,
That's
on
correct.
average.
That's correct.
So it's about 30% of this is assumed to be general fund dollars because of what I call background traffic. In other words, other people that are going to use the roads for cut-through. But it makes the analysis based on traffic engineering standards that it's 70%. For the benefit of the audience, too, let's assume that we have a McDonald's drive-through that's 3,000 or 4,000 square feet. We have a residential house that's 3,000 or 4,000 square feet. What it does by traffic generation method is it charges the McDonald's a much higher rate because of the traffic that's going to go through their drive-through versus the residential that'll have 2 or 3 cars and they'll make a certain number of trips. So from an engineering perspective, it's fairly well defined what various types of businesses and residential generated traffic.
So in summary, we have to find a way to fund capital improvements, especially roadways. I think we do want to encourage growth. If it's quality growth, particularly quality commercial growth, but without the funds for roadways, again, it's going to yield congestion, accidents, and lower quality of life and less economic development. It would dig our hole deeper, frankly. But having said all that, with the alternatives that we laid out, flexibility for developers is possible as long as we're whole at the end of the day. So what staff is recommending, and here's a summary of all the different alternatives, is that we change our policy a little bit, but only in this way, in that we show these alternatives to developers, and then we work with them in partnership, again, in partnership and collaboration, and identify the alternative that best meets their particular needs. Some developers may want to build the road instead of paying the fee. Some will just want to pay the fee. Some may want to create a CFD. Some may want to create a sales tax district. The one I like, again, is the residential subsidized commercial. But any one of these 6 alternatives may work, given the individual set of circumstances. So again, these are the alternatives. We recommend using that as a menu for developers and working closely with them. And I'll be happy to answer any questions that you
And
might
I would
have.
also caution at this point that while this will work very well going forward on what I call a new deal that you're starting from scratch, it's very difficult, if not impossible, to renegotiate a deal that's already been negotiated.
Right, and that was going to be my question, because having said that, you know, we have a circumstance within the city right now where there's a grocery store that hasn't been built.
Right.
And I'm wondering if there can be any alternative, if we can find a way to maybe open a window of opportunity in this economically distressed time to see if we can incentivize or partner or do something that will build that grocery store.
Yeah, actually, I guess I have good news for council, mayor, and everybody in the audience. There is, and that is by doing a sales tax sharing agreement. As I described to you, there are some inherent negatives to that. You're going to lose some funds away from the general fund by doing that, but we can certainly sit with the commercial developer, sit with Fry's, and negotiate a development agreement. And we can agree that they can pledge up to 50% of their future sales tax revenue to pay for their impact fee. If we do that, I would strongly recommend two things: that they still pay their impact fee up front, okay? They use their sales tax to repay it. That way we know we're whole. But here's the other thing, as an incentive, and I would imagine you'll agree with it. If we agree to make that development agreement, then they should commit to build the Fry's within the next 6 months, or at least get started.
Right. And that sounds like a great alternative. And one of my concerns would be that this would not be an open-ended offer to everybody that we're going to, change things, because we do have to pay for these roads. We do have to pay for the infrastructure. We do have to make sure that that we have public safety out there serving these areas, these communities. So, I mean, this is not a time to take votes or to give any specific direction, but hopefully we can bring an idea like that back to council in a regular session where the council can voice their opinion and vote on whether or not they're willing to take such action.
Sure, we can certainly present that to the commercial developer and to Fry's to take their temperature on that. But again, we're at least extending an olive branch, giving them an opportunity to move forward with construction of the store.
I appreciate that you've been willing to do all this research and study, because I asked for this workshop, 2 months ago? And it's mainly because of the pressure of the people that are here in this room, mostly, who asked for some commercial development out in their neighborhood, which is in my district. And being that there have been some mailers out there, I think we need to know what the education is. And thank you for giving us the background and where this came from, what we're talking about, and what alternatives are possible. Because I think everyone in our neighborhoods out north of Surprise wants some commercial development. They need that. I met with some people just last weekend, and they said even if they can't get a large grocery store initially, if we can at least get some convenience store or some other type of alternative, let's get something built out there that can help the people that live there.
Very good.
Just as a point of clarification, everybody needs to understand it's not the city who goes out and gets, builds grocery stores. It's got to be the developer themselves that want to come into the city and build a store. So we can incentivize all we want, but if they don't want to come, they're not going to come.
That's exactly right. It really comes down to market more than anything else. At the end of the day, they're going to make a location decision based on a 20-year outlook, not on whether or not they have to pay an $800,000 fee or not. They're going to look at the market area. They're going to do a customer response survey, and they're going to make sure that they have a significant margin of return before they make that development decision. So I think, in that situation, when development slowed down, then all the commercial development area had to take a second look at it. But with the alternative we talked about tonight, we'll engage discussions with the developer, and hopefully they'll come to the fore and build something right away.
Great.
I have a question.
Sure, just a second.
Okay.
A second action that would be coming before the council would be whether or not we're agreeable to this menu, you might say, to offer to developers and say, you can do it this way, you can do it this way, or that way. Correct?
Frankly, I think this menu doesn't necessarily need formal council action in this regard, in that it's really just a negotiating point. It's a menu that we can work with developers. The output would be in the form of a PUD or a development agreement or an annexation agreement. So ultimately, council would touch this, but not until we have specific deals in place.
Okay, thank you.
Have we exhausted all the alternatives? Is there other alternatives, other cities that are using that, I mean, we have, what, six items here that can possibly be used. Is there other alternatives?
Frankly, there could be an infinite number of alternatives. There really could. But I guess what the council is telling us to tell developers is that if you're having challenges paying these impact fees,
right,
we have a menu. We'll talk to you about it. If they want to order something a la carte off the menu, if you will, then we'll sit and talk to them some more. But at the end of the day, we have to be whole. And as long as it's legal
totally
and so forth. But yeah, there's more alternatives, but these are the ones that seem to be the most popular and the ones that make sense in our current status.
One that Goodyear uses quite a bit is a public improvement cost recovery. Are you familiar with those?
I am, yeah.
Why isn't that on this?
That's actually a form of the sales tax reimbursement.
Yeah.
It's the same thing, just different name. I was just trying to use real common language.
Is there any advantages to their ordinance versus ours?
We'll take a look at it. We'll take a look at it. But again, I think my recommendation is that we're actually a little bit more fluid. Instead of making it a formal code change, which locks us in, that we sit with developers and create a partnership and provide as much flexibility as we can and then bring it forward.
Sure.
The
But I'm
city
just,
has more financial liability, I would note, on that particular vehicle.
and so Goodyear is, I know, more financial liability than.
Well, now, here's the question. It will never become an issue until you have a default.
That's right. That's right.
And when you have a default, then that's when things will come into question. But there is an increased risk as it relates to using that vehicle.
The other question that I had was, do we have to build roads of regional significance at the beginning? I mean, can they be added onto? Is there a mechanism that can be used for future? I mean, can we facilitate lower impact fees at the beginning and then recoup it afterwards?
Certainly, that's an alternative.
It's almost like a loan. I mean, it almost assures us of a guaranteed stream of income.
That's an alternative. That's more a payment plan, for lack of a better description, if you will.
Do we come up with those ever?
We certainly could, sure. But I would strongly recommend that if we're going to do that, we tie that to phases of development.
Sure. As well as some kind of a surety or a letter of credit.
We have to have a financial backstop.
Sure.
Absolutely. But certainly, we could talk to developers about that as well.
I mean, then that could be, it would generate more as people build more homes. So everything would be on a scale of receiving future income.
Here's the challenge, though, with that, and that's an issue. You'll all cringe when I remind you of this. Remember, scallop streets could be an issue under that scenario, and I think that's some issues that we've had over the past few years where a developer comes in and builds half streets. Big financial challenge for the city in the future, and also a challenge with traffic movement. We hear from residents all the time, it's like, why do I have to go from this lane to that lane, and so on. So as long as we wouldn't create scallop streets, or more importantly, streets that lead to nowhere, we could consider it. But I think it would need more analysis, number one, and two, would be handled on a case-by-case basis.
Okay.
Right now, the financial assurances are fairly difficult to obtain.
Oh, I understand.
Could we break up the special planning areas into more areas?
We certainly could do that, but I would recommend it only for the areas to the far north and west, for those roadways that we're probably not going to build for a number of years, and we're probably not going to have development for a number of years. We'd still be whole, which is a good thing, but it would just make that area smaller. And the other thing we have to be certain of is that if development does occur, that the roadways that they're paying for are only really used by that district, or else there's an equity issue.
Well, I would think that would make that area more expensive to develop down the road.
It would, absolutely.
And it would incentivize more corridor development.
Right.
Which I don't know is necessarily a good thing.
Yeah, okay, but anyway, I was just thinking maybe that's another approach we could take, was break it up into more special planning areas and get it more closer to the development of what roads they're paying.
Let me throw an example, and I think I'll get my roads right here. But if you broke it up into one area up into two areas, for example, and you had a road that connected Grand with State Route 74, for example, the question then becomes, you break it up into two areas and you just have the one part of that particular road that goes up to 74, and the other area you're going to force all that traffic back down to Grand because you may have a 4-lane road coming back down to Grand, but a 2-lane cowpath, if you will, up to 74. I think you're going to get some people that are going to come in and say, well, why aren't you taking this road through? We're getting that right now as it relates to Joe Max.
That's true.
When are you going to get Joe Max through? Because I want to go in that particular direction. So that's a consideration.
Mm-hmm. But I think, if we exhaust the alternatives and it's still not working, that's something we could come back and look at, but I would recommend that we hold off on that one a little while.
Mm-hmm.
Joe?
Just food for thought. We got to be careful because these sales tax, like they said, are diverted away from other citywide needs. And if we get in the habit of issuing sales tax reimbursements, I think they can get real easy to do. But sales tax, I don't think we should use these things lightly. I don't know if I think that's the best way to go.
Well, I think you make an excellent point there, and I'll just use a number for example, but if you had $10,000 worth of groceries that was previously bought down at a grocery store off Grand, and a grocery store went up there, then what you're essentially doing is you're going to be taking 50% of that, or $5,000, reducing that impact fee for that particular development, which is a good thing. But the net effect is you just transferred where those groceries are being bought, which the net effect has been a reduction to the city's general fund sales tax revenue of $5,000.
Right. And plus, like we were saying, groceries aren't really a good sales tax generator for us. So that would be, in my opinion, probably the worst thing to use for a grocery store. Mm-hmm. So I don't think we better jump too quickly to say we want item number 3 to go toward a grocery store.
Well, the way we propose to construct it is if you wanted to do it, is it would be a 50-50 split, and you would run the risk of what I call diversion. It diverts from one store to another. Now, if somebody was buying outside the city, it would be different, but particularly in this hot weather, most of the groceries are probably being bought at a more convenient location just due to the heat. But you would reduce that. I mean, clearly the opening of the new Fry's over here has had an impact on some of the surrounding stores, and in my opinion, it's simply diluted the market.
Well, we've got, 60 to 70,000 people commuting outside of our city each day. And I got to think that if they're commuting outside the city, that they're possibly on their way home, they're going to be stopping to get groceries. And if they're stopping to get groceries, chances are they could be stopping in Peoria, Glendale. Okay, but so I think that assumption is that we're diverting it away from another grocery store in Surprise. We may be attracting more business by having a closer grocery store, one that is used by those commuters. Number one. Number two, I think that we would attract a lot more of Whitman and Wickenburg shoppers to that area. It might stand a chance. Okay, it's a little closer. So I think we could have all kinds of assumptions in this scenario. But what should try to find a way is to make things work and see if we can facilitate this without doing harm to the city and their finances, but also accommodation for the citizens.
We'll move in that direction.
I certainly agree with that. I like the idea that we can have maybe this 6-month window of opportunity where Fry's wants to build. We're going to make it possible for them to. And we're facing unique circumstances. We all recognize that. We talk about volunteerism and compassion in our city, And so I think this is a step would be a step in that direction, is to make an accommodation if they're willing to come to the table.
Absolutely. And keeping Council or Vice Mayor Johnson's idea in mind, maybe this is a unique application based on a unique set of circumstances, but in the future, as he suggests, be very, very cautious in the future about using it.
I think that's a very, very wise warning that the Vice Mayor gave. I totally agree with him. So, any other comments?
Just a quick comment on going off of what Vice Mayor had mentioned. Can we lean the property owners along those roadway improvements, similar to the ordinance that we've established with that 10, 15-year payback, to recover or recoup some of the sales tax loss to pay for the roadway?
The CFD in reverse.
You know what I'm saying?
In some states, you can do that. I think that's a question that Mr. Bailey needs to answer. We've had some discussions in that regard. In a lot of places, you can do what's called a special assessment, and you do what's called a special assessment bond. They can pay for the improvements over a period of, say, 15 years at tax-exempt rates. It's highly marketable paper because you can do it as a special assessment. It maintains tax lien status. There's no question that we can create a lien in this state against the property for the 15 years, but as I understand the rules in this state right now, that once you exceed 10 or 15 years, and if no activities occurred, that lien becomes worthless. And so the question becomes, lien holders are not going to be willing to accept what's called a zero coupon bond in anticipation that they're going to get money in the future. They're going to have to be some element to get paid, and the vehicle to get paid is to be able to put it on the property tax. And I think Mr. Bailey can answer better whether we can put it on the property tax.
And I would want to give Mr. Bailey some time to research that question. So perhaps Mr. Bailey can do the research and then bring that back to council?
Yes, I would actually like some time to take a look at that, and we can report that back to council.
Anything else? Now, before I adjourn, I want to say thank you. Great presentation, lots of information, some of it very, very complicated that you made quite understandable. I appreciate it. I'll do. This meeting is adjourned.
Thank you.
The popcorn, cotton candy, and more. And parents, the best part, this event, sponsored by the city and local faith-based leaders, is safe and it is free. For more information, call Surprise Police at 623-222-4263 or 4270. Surprise teens, get the new school year kicked off the right way and have some fun.